Hello, it's Jenny Lamorgan with Lean Into Green, and I'm excited to be here today with our guest, Tama Matsuoka Wong, and she's going to talk to us about foraging. And I know we're all interested in this. It's something that we want to know more about. And just to give you a little bit about Lean Into Green before we get started, I'm a green entrepreneur and owner of greenwomanstore.com. And I'm always looking for ways to step a little greener into my lifestyle personally. And so this Telesummit is all about sharing what we can learn from other women experts in the living green and sustainability fields. So hoping that you will enjoy it as much as I'm enjoying this. And we'll get started talking with our guest today. Tama Matsuoka Wong is a forager. She's a weed eater and a meadow doctor. She's also a lawyer and a mother of 3 children. Most recently, she co-authored the field guide and cookbook, Foraged Flavor. She lectures at garden clubs, slow food gatherings, colleges and high schools, and she hosts foraging events, which I would love to go to. She supplies local wild foods to restaurants in New York City and collaborates with conservation groups and farmers to make the most of weeds on their land. She launched Meadows and More to connect experts in the field of meadow restoration, botany, and wildlife with people in her community. In 2007, she was named Steward of the Year by the New Jersey Forest Service. Tama is passionate about finding new foods in wild landscapes. Wild plants are little treasures, she says, and many of them have ancient culinary traditions from around the world. She studies the plant species, their historical backgrounds, and ecological behavior. And then she tests the peak times to harvest and eat them to suit our modern tastes and lifestyles. Welcome, Tama, and I am so grateful for you to be here and forage up some new flavors for our kitchens.
Oh, hi, Jenny, and thanks so much for having me.
All right. I am so excited. I just love your website. I have found so much information on there.
Oh, good.
I know, and I love the images. You know, they just kind of take you to the meadow.
Yeah.
So I can tell you're a meadow lover.
Yes, yes.
As well as a meadow creator, and we'll talk about that here. So let's start by telling us about Meadows and More and where you connect great food with nature and how you got started with your foraging passion.
Okay. So that's a lot of big questions. So how should I start?
Well, how did you start? How did you start with the foraging? I know one of the videos on your website, I think, is with you and your daughter, and she's exploring, I think, dandelion soup.
Yes. So that says the fried, the tempura.
Oh, nice.
So I guess I'd say that for most of my, when I was young, my mother would do foraging. I think she would pick things, and she was really into plants and gardening, and we had a vegetable garden. So I always sort of had that, but then I went away to school, and I worked mostly in urban environments for maybe 25 years. So then, and a lot of it was overseas. I came back to New Jersey, which is where I grew up, and we had sort of our first, with my family, and we had our first house that was not in an incredibly urban environment, and so I was totally reignited and passionate to kind of look at the same things but differently. So I started looking at, sort of just the plants that grow around that aren't necessarily planted. I tried planting some plants, and I wasn't very good at it. A lot of stuff died. So I thought, why not make the use of the things that are around you? And the more I started exploring it, the more fascinating it was. So that's kind of how I started getting interested in wild plants.
All right. So success kind of encouraged you toward foraging, or maybe the lack of success. I know we all
Yes,
have a hard
lack
time.
of success.
Lack
Of success. Yes.
Especially, I think, trying to grow tomato plants from seed. That's very difficult.
It's really difficult. And, where I live, it's kind of a floodplain. So things get, washed away. It's really wet in the spring, and then in the summer it's like rock hard. Like the soil, I mean.
So doing the meadow work and the foraging work, you really become intimate with the geography of the area. That's that's really special.
Yeah, I guess it just sort of started that you just start to observe and the things that are around you. And when I say, wild, it can be even just in a little container of something, right? That there's something, that there's soil in there and something's growing, and instead of immediately thinking, oh, this is something I don't want, figure out what it is first. So there's all these little things you can notice in like small ways or in large ways, and it can be really rewarding, I think.
That's interesting, because we've always got little things sprouting up in our in our pots that the birds have blessed us with.
So maybe, it's like nature and green is trying to offer something to you.
And maybe something we need, like dandelions.
Yes.
I know, there's so many different kinds of dandelions, and I just love them because I think the birds appreciate them as well in our gardens. But they're such a good detox for our liver and a good liver support as well. But, which ones to use, what part of the plant to use, all of that.
Well, it is sort of funny because I do remember my mother trying to feed me dandelions because she read, this Yoga Bensing, and she just put a whole heap of it together and threw it on a plate of it. I just don't have very good memories of that. Even though I love my mom. It wasn't that great. So I sort of had this prejudice against it, and we just look at this and we're so conditioned to think about, dandelions are something I have to get rid of, and I have to have this sort of manicured landscape. And if I have a dandelion, that means that I've somehow failed and I'm a neglectful person or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. It almost looks
so
like
I used to look at these dandelions like, oh my gosh, this is coming up. But when I started to look at it differently and realize that it's really not a bad thing, then you start to appreciate more and more. And now we can hardly wait till we can see the dandelions. One interesting thing I'd sort of say too, I work a lot with chefs, and I was in the kitchen of a kind of fine dining restaurant a couple months ago, and they have all these people coming in all the time trying to show them like amazing product. And there was this guy from Italy. He was kind of this, and they had all this honey from Italy that they went around, and the way they would get the stuff was they go to certain places that it was sort of northern Italy. They have these hillsides full of a particular plant, and they would set these bees in there, and the bees would just forage, for their heart's delight, all on those hillsides. And he had these pictures that he brought this huge picture, and the one he was most excited about was this whole hillside of dandelions. And he was trying to explain to us, like, how beautiful it is and how then, it turns all white after it's finished flowering. And I was laughing because most people here think, it's a scourge of trying to get rid of. And here, the Italians are thinking it's one of the most beautiful things they've seen. And it actually is very beautiful.
And it creates different honeys. I know I've had different honey. They're
like
not flavored.
Like golden notes in it. It's really nice.
And you really can't tell the difference in the honeys depending on what areas.
Yeah, it's very intense like that. So, but you could see that they appreciate just even how it looks, and they thought it was so special. So they didn't know that people are like spraying all their dandelions here.
Right, or pulling them up, and it's the little seeds that the dandelions make. To see a whole mountainside of them, you would jump for joy because
and it turns like snow.
Oh my goodness! And that it's replanting for the next year, so that would make you smile. I can understand that.
Right.
All right. So is there any other particular weed that you're excited about?
Well, to finish on the dandelion note, just a couple points.
Yes,
be,
please.
for the dandelion, I think it's one of the reasons why my mother's salad wasn't so extra delicious was because she probably wasn't picking at the right time. Because we talked about, picking it at the peak time, just like any other plant or fruit that you would eat. There's a good time that it's good, and there's a time it's not good. So with the dandelion, if you pick it after it flowers the leaves, it tends to get more tough and bitter. So if you're picking it when it's young and it's kind of lighter green, it's not bitter. It has a little bit of a tang or a kick, and it's really nice. The other thing that's sort of coming out, there's the research about the stuff that's coming out, is that dandelion leaves, wild dandelion leaves, have 7 times the amount of phytonutrients as spinach.
Wow.
So this is really packed with vitamins. So you don't even need that much, probably. And the flowers, I really like the flowers if you kind of flash fry them, kind of in a when I call it tempura, which is an Asian style of quick frying, not like a deep fry, and it just becomes all puffy and sort of sweet. It's really nice. So we love dandelion.
Very nice. And it sounds like with the leaves of the dandelion, because they're so high in the nutrition, that even a few raw leaves in a salad would give us those high vitamins.
Yes, and the chefs I'm working with are saying that basically, there's a couple tricks that you use to reduce. If something has a kind of bitter kick, you pair it with things that are kind of like a potato or an egg. So a potato, egg, bacon salad with dandelion is wonderful, because the dandelion will bring out and balance those other things. Or if you have if you put in a salad or something, if you have it with something with a vinaigrette, vinegar balances very well with things that have a stronger bite to them.
That makes sense. So I think that part of your passion comes from your love for these flavors.
Yes, we like eating the Wong house, and I have 3 daughters and a husband, and they like to eat, and they're very honest in their opinions about something. So if it doesn't pass the Wong household test, it's like got to go out the door then.
All right. Well, that's fair. That's fair. It's kind of our job to as the cook to make it taste good.
Yeah, it's supposed to be something to enjoy. We don't have to eat stuff that tastes like space shuttle food, right?
Definitely.
So yeah, you can eat things that are green, that are just growing there, offered by nature, that aren't fiddled with at all, and they can be more nutritious and they can taste good.
And in your book Foraged Flavor, it's both a field guide and a cookbook. So you've got recipes in there for us to experiment with, or you've done the experimenting for us to prepare.
Yes, so again, since I'm kind of a professional forager, so I'm actually selling to restaurants mostly. I extract information from them about how they use it and simple methods of preparation. And for the cookbook, I did work with one of the chefs that I really started getting this whole inspiration with, and he made home-style recipes, which we tested at home. That was kind of a big event in itself to take a chef from a restaurant kitchen and tell him that no, our oven doesn't go to 90 degrees or whatever, and to try and make things that were really easy for us to make that we could use. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And as far as the field guide part of it, can you tell us a little bit about that?
So. Yes, the field guide part of it is so there's really clear pictures of the plant at the time to try and get it as close to the time when you would pick it as possible. So a lot of times the reasons I did this is because I looked at a lot of books that were out there at the time that talked about edible plants, and a lot of times they would give pictures like all in when it was in flower or something, and that might not have been the best time to pick it. So I tried to have pictures of the plant in detail when it was at the time that we thought was the best to eat it. And then to give very simple, like a 5-step guide about how to identify the plants. And I've worked very, very closely with some of the good field botanists in this country. And it's an art because you can go on for 3 pages to try and describe a plant with all kinds of botanical lingo, but it may not really help you in the field, meaning in actual life outside, not under a microscope. So we really tried to make it very simple in terms of things that would be easy to identify and wouldn't be confused with other things, and that you could find around you. So that was kind of the aim. And if people still, I realize now that there's a whole range of people. Like some people actually can't identify a dandelion but we do have, whereas other people are totally, geeking out on plants. So to try and come up with something that would be an average for people is what we were endeavoring to do. But we do also have a plant forum, an identification forum on my website, Meadows and More. And if you want, you can post photos on there and ask questions. And the botanist that I work with is one of the moderators for that. So you can ask questions if you're still, uncomfortable with what you're seeing.
I see that. I'm looking at that right now, and that's very active. That's fun, and it's very important too, I think, because we're trying to figure out what's right and what's safe, and I guess there's probably some caveats about what not to eat in there as well.
Yes, I still find it, because it's really new, that there's some information out. There is some information on the web, like everything, that people say what they want, but it might not necessarily be that accurate. The other thing, though, I'd say is that a lot of these things are finding their way onto farmers markets. So people that feel uncomfortable or don't live in a place that they can easily run out, they don't have a backyard or even a planter, then they could go to their farmers market and ask their farmer, because a lot of the things you could find are starting to be found in farmers markets now. And if they aren't, you could probably ask your farmer, because they will know them as a weed, to get some for you.
That's wonderful. That's a great suggestion. I'm looking at your foraging calendars, and you have photos of the plant, and then you have the taste. So you're telling us kind of what to expect from the plant itself, and then you tell us about the nutrition, and then the season to start looking for it, and then how to prepare it. So whether to eat it raw or whether to eat cooked, or the tips only, or all of that. So you just got so much information on here for us to start. To give us
that people can, and one of the things I would recommend is that I think it can be kind of overwhelming for people to just be like, oh, I'm going out there and there's 100 plants to figure out. Just focus on one thing and just do that one, and then get to know that one plant, get to figure out what your plant is doing. Like if it's a dandelion, like, okay, I've noticed it's sticking up in the middle. Maybe I'll try it that way. So just try that one. Don't try and overwhelm yourself.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So, and you mentioned that you provide restaurants in New York with foraged delicacies. This is a new trend for restaurateurs.
For the last, I'd say since about 5 years ago, they have this sort of chef's award, restaurant award, best restaurant in the world, and this restaurant in Copenhagen called Noma got that award, and he depends heavily on foraging for his ingredients, because Copenhagen is in the north, it's a kind of a boreal climate, so the agricultural growing season is very short, so they have to actually look outside of that 6-week window, and instead of trying to import everything, they had this philosophy of, why don't we look at what we have, what is around us, and try and use that instead of trying to, import everything or copy other people or try and make our agricultural season longer when it's artificial to do so. So that it was very interesting from sort of a culinary point of view, because it kind of got people thinking differently, and it sort of got people to rethink, wait a minute, this is how, we used to do things, but we just forgot about it, and then actually now, this guy's making it into a trend. So, it's both old and new, I'd say.
And it is old, and it's medicinal, and I think so many people around the world, their food is medicine. They don't have access in a lot of areas to a lot of doctors or a lot of pharmacies, and the plants provide the medicine. And I think this foraging is really leading us back in that direction too. It's a healthier way of eating, I think, with a little instruction.
There actually is a book that just came out in June, and it's called Eating on the Wild Side. And it's got a fair amount of coverage and press and stuff in national press. And basically, it's a woman who's an investigative journalist or writer, and she studied all these reports on nutrition, et cetera, and she concluded that wild food is one of the healthiest things you could eat, which is pretty neat.
Well, and it might have to do with some of the soils that the plants are growing freely in.
It's not just the soils, but it's also the fact that they haven't been coddled as in agriculture, where they haven't been irrigated or pesticided, et cetera. So they've had to form their own defenses against things. And those defenses are kind of chemical defenses, which are antioxidant, et cetera, phytonutrients, which is fairly interesting.
Very nice, very nice.
I think the other point there is that, we've evolved as humans eating these things. So it's kind of just natural that, of course, we evolved eating this. So the things that feed our bodies and our cells are going to be the things that, we evolved eating, and not what we just developed in the last 10 years.
Right, and it's what's on the land. And there is a lot to be said for eating locally, to eat, especially with things like honey, to eat the foods that grow locally that our own bodies are used to. Or more adaptive.
I think for me the main thing that I find so exciting about this is that it's really open to everybody. It's just around you. We just don't know. It's just the information that we just don't know how to use it, or we're just kind of on a treadmill that we're used to just buying things that are packaged and have an ingredient in the store, right? Or label.
And this takes us away from that, and it really takes us back into the land.
Yeah, and it takes us back to how we've been eating before we started packaging everything. This is and people in other countries still eat this way, right? Still eat this way as part of their traditions. We just somehow, as we urbanize and modernize, are getting further away from that. And this is just taking us back.
Well, thank goodness that the land has memory,
Yeah.
and that the birds keep dropping the seeds, and that these wonderful opportunities to forage are still around us. And I think it does have a lot to do with what we see and opening our eyes to it. So thank you for opening our eyes to it. This is exciting, I think. It's and certainly fun to introduce children to.
Oh, I actually think that children are more natural about it than adults, especially third grade. From third grade, because they're old enough not to just, stuff anything in their mouth, but they somehow don't have that I don't know what comes over because I work with young adults and children, and they don't have that. Something comes over sometimes that they develop this kind of, I don't know, fear or something. But when they're younger, they're so natural, they love it. It's just, the flavors, the taste, it's great to just pick something.
As long as they have as long as they have a guide. Oh. I think it's going to stop.
Okay.
As long as they have a guide.
Course, yeah. So, there are obviously some very basic principles that you would need to follow. I look at them as kind of common sense. Since we're talking about, one is to really know what you're doing. And there's a whole spectrum of people. Some people are afraid to touch anything, even a dandelion, right? And then other people just I have my people that just walk along and try everything, which is not a good practice because there are poisonous plants.
And some don't taste very good, for sure.
Yeah, if it's not poisonous but just doesn't taste good, then I'm not as worried about that. And yeah, there's a spectrum of delicious and tastes good and it's right out your back door. delicious but too difficult to try and, get at, and, edible but tastes like cardboard, and toxic, where you'll just feel bad for a day, and then poisonous, where you will die. So, there's a spectrum. So, it isn't something to just kind of be totally cavalier about, but then on the other hand, we don't have to be completely petrified either. So I think there's a balance about understanding what things are. There's definitely huge sources of information that you can get the information you want to be comfortable. And the other thing too is the landscape. The landscape. We're talking about green. This is the green series, so it brings home even more about having landscapes that are not degraded and that aren't complete brownfields that we can't grow anything on anymore because it has too many toxic chemicals that's not fit to eat. So you want to make sure that you're also foraging from a landscape that is good, of high quality, and that you have permission, following not only legal but ethical. I feel like ethical rules, like I wouldn't just go into somebody's place and take stuff from them without, getting permission and talking to the person whose property it is. So I think those are, there's obviously some basic ground rules about that. I think there's also, I have a sustainability code in my book, which is green, yellow, red, which is kind of to just get across to people that not all plants are the same. So when you're foraging, we don't want to sort of be the next strip mining of plants. So some plants are intimately connected with the underlying landscape and have a really important space in sort of the ecology, which means all up the food chain. They're very important for certain pollinators who then are used for birds that are then, so the whole spectrum. And so those plants, we want to be really careful that we aren't just pulling them out of the ground. Whereas there are other plants which, for the U.S. government's definition, are invasive plants. These are plants that have moved over here. They're opportunistic plants that have moved over here either intentionally brought by us or unintentionally. And these, the U.S. government is spending like $200 billion to get rid of. And some of them, in the countries they come from, are culinary delights. So why not use those?
Oh, that's interesting. And I think amaranth is one of those.
Yes, it is.
Yes, yes. And it's a
so a lot of our, AKA weeds are some of these plants that are opportunistic. They don't need anything. They thrive, in drought or floods or whatever. So those are, and so you don't have to worry or think anything about taking out a lot of them and using them.
And it is about identifying them and then
But that's what a lot of these would grow. Either invasive plants will grow on conservation properties. So if you spoke to there's in every single state you have usually academic institutions and environmental centers or conservation groups that you could go to, and they will tell you, we're trying to get rid of this, but we know it's it'll be in some book as edible. Or you can go to your farmer, and they'll know these are these weeds. I'm trying to get rid of amaranth. So it's really just connecting, like, what some people don't want with, like, something that's really good from a eating point of view.
And can you talk more about how foraging fits into conservation and sustainability? I think part of it is it gets us closer to the land.
So I forage mostly on my own property. I have 28 acres. But since I'm also now foraging professionally, I need certain things I don't have on my own property. And so I work very closely with conservation groups in helping to assess and restore their properties to make sure that there's a good balance of diversity. And so a lot of things a lot of places have management plans. They're trying to get rid of certain plants. And those plants, I will forage and take away for them.
And have you transplanted any of them?
No, if it's an invasive plant. If it's an invasive plant, so I do not take plants out of the wild and transplant them.
Okay.
So if it's an invasive plant, I'm not trying to plant it someplace else because, again, it's invasive, meaning it's out of control. It's affecting the biodiversity of the landscape. We have so much of it that I don't need to plant it. It's like out. It's there. I just take it away.
Right. For the ones that are invasive. But have you tried to transplant any plants from the wild, perhaps into your own meadow or your own garden?
So I don't. There's actually, from a sort of conservation point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer is no, and that is because a lot of plants you can't like plants that are native and in the wild. To a certain place, they have kind of a provenance, a terroir. So they're specific to that type of soil. And especially if they're kind of a specialist plant, you don't want to take them out of where they are and try and put them in some place. One, because they'll probably die, and two, because you're kind of degrading that landscape you're taking it out of. The best way, if you want to do that, is to go to a native plant nursery. I work very closely with a place called American Native Nursery. But there are others across the country. There's some great ones in the Midwest, Prairie Moon Nursery. And you can actually get some of these indigenous species from them that have been, nursery propagated. Originally seed collected from the wild, but propagated in the nursery in a responsible and sustainable way.
So really what you're talking about with foraging is to pick from the plant the leaves and the flowers and the parts of the plant that you're going to eat, but not to actually pull the plant out of the ground, and especially if there isn't a lot of it.
Well, actually depends on the plant. So that's why I have this code. So every species I have a code, red, yellow, green. If it's green, pull the plant out. Yeah, all you can. If it's red, yes, you should probably get a species from a local native plant nursery, or you can order and then plant that in your backyard. Very garden worthy, and you'll be actually doing nature a favor by doing that. And then yellow, the in-between, are native plants that you'll find around that, yes, what you said, you can harvest the seeds or leaves or things, but you don't want to pull the whole thing out. So it depends very much on the on the plant and their behavior and their relation to the landscape.
All right. Well, thank you for that. That's very, very helpful. Okay. Now, let's see. I know that you have a page on your website about how to make a meadow and the steps involved. And meadows are just such a place of retreat and calmness and healing, I think, for the land as well as for us. But can you talk about your love for meadows? And I'm going to look at that page while we're talking on your website.
So, I mean, a lot of this is, part of it is just kind of aesthetics and enjoyment, I'd say. And to me, a natural landscape that has a little bit of wild in it, I'm not talking about, walking through a bush. There's some structure to it, meaning you can have a meadow, but you can have trails through it so that, it's navigable. As opposed to somehow just having a complete monoculture, lawn from your door all the way to the road. I just feel like a meadow is it's something that's alive, and it's just so appealing. Right now, I have two meadows, and one is just coming into peak, and it's just beautiful. The colors, the smells, the motion in them. It's just really rejuvenating and it's something to enjoy. And from a green point of view, it's very little maintenance once you kind of get it established.
And it really helps the land to rejuvenate as well.
Yes, so as I kind of mentioned before, that I live on a floodplain, and at least, in a lot of the country these days, we think a lot about flooding and flooding-related events. So one of the problems of flooding is, having a lot of water, and where does the water go? And so one of the ways that if you have a meadow, as opposed to a lawn, is that the roots of these plants in a meadow, and I have a wet meadow, they will suck up all this excess water to reduce flooding. So they'll be really happy, in a flooded, wet environment, and they will help take up some of that water. Whereas if you think about just a regular lawn, the roots in a lawn are very, very shallow. It's kind of like a kind of rug or a carpet just on the surface. And so if you have a lot of water running onto lawn, it will just keep running on and flooding. So actually a meadow is really healthy, both from just a practical point of view in terms of, if you don't like getting flooded, but also from an ecological point of view.
Right. Wow. And they're so beautiful. Meadows are just so much grace in the freedom, I think, of the plants.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So you have a list of plants that are good candidates for meadow planting.
Yeah, I tried to come up with plants that are very easy without a lot of care. I mean, it will depend on what you're starting with. So if you have kind of a backyard, and it's going to depend on the conditions there and what's there. So it is kind of specific. But if you wanted to plant a couple things, there are a lot of overlap between my Foraged Flavor book that has red, planted things, and my meadow list in terms of things that you can enjoy, both, from, again, just enjoying their beauty, to also ecological properties, to also eating them. So you could have, there's a number of people that I've seen, or things going on now about edible gardens, and I think you could have, kind of a meadow garden to start. Would be kind of fun for people.
That sounds like fun. Go out in the meadow and collect dinner. And you also, yeah, definitely. Sure. And you're including herbs in there as well. You've got lavender and bergamot and mints and all kinds of herbs and mugwort.
So lavender bergamot was actually not lavender and not bergamot. It's actually in the mint family, but it's very, very easy care. You don't have to water and water or fertilize any of these things. And in fact, I like it better without that. But it's a fine, beautiful plant. And we do have a couple recipes for them. I have a recipe in the book, and I think probably in the next couple months, there's also a cookie recipe for the leaves, which is really nice, for the lavender bergamot.
Okay. Now, I know lavender as a bush, and bergamot, I believe, isn't that an Asian orange?
So basically, that's the thing with common names, which I should probably say, which is that the name of this is called lavender bergamot, but that's a common name that that doesn't mean that it's actually related at all to lavender or bergamot.
Okay.
You really have to look at so for everything that I have the Latin name. Latin is actually the common ground for all these plants. So if there's a plant in China and I think it's moved over here, I will ask them in China, what is the Latin name? And once I know that, if I can identify whether that's the same species here. Because whereas common names are much more like cultural, like someone just said, that looks like a, jolly green giant to me or something, so they'll call it that. Common names are just whatever somebody decided to call it for themselves.
Okay.
So when people are trying to identify things, it is important, to ultimately look at the Latin name.
And you have some native edible plants as well in your recipes.
Yes, so lavender bergamot is a native edible plant.
Okay.
In the mint family.
And so it really does depend, too, what area of the country we live in and what's going to grow there.
Yes,
sure.
Although a lot of the weeds that are in the book are things that you find not only across the country, are like all over in the world.
Oh, it's very helpful. Okay. So nothing is too specialized. Really, the world is opened up for us if we just go out and take a walk through the meadows and create our own meadows.
Yes, or, look in your planter before you pull your weed out.
Exactly. So tell us again I don't think I gave you an opportunity to talk about Meadows and More, which is the name of your website, meadowsandmore.com, and just how you got started with doing this kind of sharing this information in this way.
Before we did this, we talked a little bit about entrepreneurs and women in business and things like that. So I think it's it came across very much in that kind of entrepreneurial way, which is that it was something that it just basically was something that was very compelling in terms of the plants and things that to me, personally, I just wanted to share the information with people. But then, now it's just kind of evolving more into a business, but still a business that at its core is, has a passion and a kind of a purpose and impact to it. So I'd say that, Meadows and More sort of started off because I was trying to get information that really helped me a lot and make it more broadly available to people, because I thought it was so common sense to be able to do this stuff and enjoy this, and it didn't take a lot to do it. And so the food part of it, which is the foraging part, just kind of followed along with that same philosophy that here's all this great stuff. It's just really people taking that first step to kind of say, like, wait a minute, you mean that thing I just, weeded out of my garden or planter or that I saw at my farmer's market is something that, is kind of sought after now from a culinary point of view? Maybe I should try that. So it's just, a lot of it is educational, but part of it, too, is just kind of seeing where it goes from an entrepreneurial point of view.
Very nice. And thank you for doing all of the research and for educating us, because I think it does, just for me personally, just seeing the title of your book was so inspiring and just made me want to, it just made me want to jump into it. Yes. And
so where do you, I know that you're on the West Coast. Where actually are you?
I'm in Southern California, and we're in a coastal desert here. Okay. So, there's a lot of herby stuff that grows just naturally without being watered a lot.
Yes,
so
and so there is this whole thing about water, right, that we really don't have all this water to waste, like irrigating. So, I mean, Southern California actually is quite interested in all of this, like very interested.
And a lot more natural gardens are being planted everywhere I go. I'm seeing more and more of it, and fewer lawns. I see, what really tickles my fancy is when I see a vegetable garden in the front yard.
Yes.
I just love it, and we see it more and more often now.
One of the biggest things that I look at since I've been doing the foraging is how much wasted space we have. I mean, I lived for 12 years, 15 years in Asia, and the amount of space we have in this country, I mean, we just don't appreciate it enough. Mm-hmm. And how much we waste that. So now, because I'm foraging, looking around for things, I just look at these huge expanses of, lawns and parks and hayfields, and I just feel like, wow, there's like nothing there. It's just like one thing, so there's so much space that we could use and appreciate.
And I think a lot is being done for how to grow food in small spaces.
Like your front yard.
Yes, or your patio or your deck. And there's a lot of apartment dwellers who are growing, complementing their food supply with stuff that they're growing on their patios. And so I think growing in small spaces is really a growing movement in our country. But the whole concept of growing a meadow, even collectively in a community or a vacant lot or that kind of thing, it's really appealing. And I thank you so much.
The other big connection, I know that I'm sorry for interrupting you or whatever, but I just had this thought. So the other really big thing with this home meadow situation is the bees. So it's been widely publicized now about how we are losing like 90% of our bees because of, there's a bunch of things people said, maybe it's a certain type of pesticide or they got this fungus, they're not strong enough. Meadows are one of the huge fortifiers for bees. So if you think about bees, what they're looking for is flowers, like a variety of flowers. At the key time, at least on this coast, is in the fall before they go into the winter months. So they're looking for stuff that is flowering now, and this is the peak time for a native meadow to be flowering. Peak time. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful now. There's like so many things, and when I go out there. And I see, like, it's just kind of completely covered with all kinds of native pollinators, beneficial wasps, and tons of honeybees. So I feel like I'm helping the farms with their bees because bees will travel, like, a couple miles, and they're just covering the meadow. And so meadows actually, in addition to being a great source of rejuvenation and pleasing, it's also really, really important because the bees are using this before the winter to stock up.
Wow. And anything we can do to support the bees right now, I think, is so important for all of us.
If there was a farm or any place that's, farming, just leave a hedgerow. Leave a hedgerow with native, wild flowers in there. And, this whole kind of, it has to be, or if you have your front garden, leave a little patch so that the stuff can be flowering, like little wildflowers now. It doesn't have to be, I feel like it's a balance. We don't have to talk about it as if, we're just leaving the whole front yard to look like a jungle, right? But on the other hand, we don't have to have it to be a lawn from the door to the road, right? There could be something in between that's a little wild patch.
And, we've had this concept in our family for a long time of leaving a place that's wild in the garden for the fairies to dance. Well, for the bees to
for the pollinators to
dance. Exactly. And the bigger the spaces for them, the better.
So
Thank you very much
for
for
of groups that asked me to talk. One of them is the beekeepers, because they asked me to talk about what's happening with the bees, and they ask about how to create the habitat for the bees.
So creating a meadow is a great solution.
A meadow is the perfect forageable habitat for bees.
Wonderful. For the bees and the humans.
Yes, and humans, yes.
And the humans. Thank you so much, Tama.
For helping us. I don't know what time it is. Oh, my gosh. Okay, we went way over.
We're doing good. Thank you for helping us reconnect with wild plants, with the bees, and with the deliciousness of weeds. We have links to your meadowsandmore.com. And we have another link to your book, Foraged Flavor, and there's a great video on this page. And also a link to how to make a meadow. And truly, for any of us, just to read through your information, it's all so inspiring. You have a fall foraging calendar coming soon on your website, and I think it would be fun for all of us to subscribe to Tama's newsletter and learn more as she goes through her experience and shares it with all of us. So thank you very, very much for being with us today. And I just want to thank you.
And all you're doing.
All right. And I just want to invite everybody to keep listening. And Lean Into Green is all about learning from women that have done it before. And every time I do an interview, I learn so much more of just delightful information, pieces of information that I did not know. So I hope you all have enjoyed it today, and I hope that you'll stay tuned and listen to more of our interviews. Thank you from Lean Into Green, and keep listening.